Hello everyone, I'm Ryujin Rising, and, well, better late than never. Here's my Afterthoughts chapter review of RWBY Volume 8, Chapter 11, Risk. My chapter reviews are not episode breakdowns, instead in them I share 5 takeaways that I can speak to from any given chapter. It's not a top 5, but rather a main 5. So here we go, my 5 takeaways from RWBY Volume 8, Chapter 11. Remember, spoilers. My first takeaway is that for how carefully, tightly constructed Volume 8's scenes are, I love how this one shows how messy Ren and Nora's relationship is. It's well constructed, and it's a mess. Those two things can coexist. There are so many little things to appreciate in the animation of this scene. The first one that I noticed was how Nora backs away a little bit when Ren first gets close. And the second one is the slight smile and the admiration in Nora's voice, thank you Samantha Ireland, when she first says they became Ren and Nora. This duo, this item. She clearly loves the life she's had with Ren, and she's grateful, but it's not what she wants it to be anymore. Ren tells her he loves her, and before, that would have been enough. Volume 7, she was begging to hear that from him. But now Nora's a different person, and this new Nora can't just have that for what it is. As much as I love this scene, and I love it, I love getting to see them talk through so much, I worry that they got the scene because they need to have time before their time is up. In other words, this is giving, well, to me, Ren, death flags. This is amazing development, just as Ren's semblance evolution is so evocative and well constructed too. But Ren's character arc and this whole romantic subplot are going this way probably because Nora will be forced to learn who just Nora is. At least at face value, that's what I'm getting. Like let Blake and Yang have their fairy tale ending, right? As clearly as the plot is going their way, they're not getting much screen time because, well, they don't need it as much in this moment. They're not the B team. They are main characters. They get to have their fairy tale ending. They're on that path. The two of them are on a pretty good wavelength. They get each other. They know why the other acts the way she acts. Blake and Yang might have a small heart-to-heart in store, but their love isn't nearly as messy as Ren and Nora's is. It was, but I get the idea that Volume 6 helped them sort through what happened with each other after Beacon fell, to the point where they don't really need to say a lot of those things anymore. Ren and Nora are so much messier, and yeah, they still are, after this scene, because that's real. And I really hope they get to fully sort through it and get their fairy tale ending too. As great as Ren and Nora's time in Volume 8 is, I just can't break that I see it as the end for at least one of them, that one being Ren. My second takeaway is that this is in no way how I expected this chapter to go, but that is an amazing thing. That is fantastic, and I was taking a lot of other things at face value that really, when you dig deeper, it's just, this chapter was never meant to go that way. The last chapter review, I pointed out how previous volumes of RWBY have kept to a certain format at this point in the story, which is that once the third act is set in motion, the opening chapter to it shows new thing after new thing of setting up the main conflict before leaving it off on a cliffhanger. Instead, well, the heroes sorely needed some downtime to catch up once they reunited, and if we had to skip these scenes for the sake of getting to the vault or something, because the conflict demanded X amount of screen time, that would kinda be like Volume 5. RWBY has a lot of years under its belt now, and the Atlas arc is not using the same storytelling tricks that a more critical viewer would say the show had relied on too much. It's telling a huge story and doing it well, clearly delivering on ideas that have been in the making for years. And I could be misreading the cliffhanger thing, I know. It is possible that it will happen in the next episode, for sure, but I'd just say that's too cynical of a perspective. This volume has been stellar, with long runtimes jam-packed with content, and it's really utilized each and every character. by the time a chapter ends. Sure, there's something small that sets up the next chapter, but it's not a cliffhanger. Even if we just look back at this old graphic that I still have of the volume roadmap, Atlas as an arc is subverting so many expectations. So no, we're not going to have another setup chapter. We need to see Ren and Nora catch up with where they are as two people. We need to see RWBY legitimately broken after knowing what the Hound is and what that means. We need to see Robin finally mention Clover and his death's impact on Crow. We need to have Ozpin and the heroes come together with a new understanding of what trust is. It's not just about Penny's character arc fighting the virus and heading to the vault for the conclusion. And it is so much better because of that. Seriously, if this chapter just started off with, well, I guess the vault is the only choice we have, and it cuts right to it, that's called Volume 5. But that's not where this went, and I don't see the next chapter going that way at all, even if it appears that it will start at the vault. Volume 8 has subverted expectation after expectation of plot structure as an entire volume of a kingdom battle that would otherwise have taken 4 chapters in, well, volumes 3 or 5. I can't wait for the rest of the volume to throw curveballs at me. Even when we think we know where it'll go, the way it pays off will probably subvert our expectations. My third takeaway is that in this house, we stand Tsundere Emerald. Tsundere Emerald can stay. One of the Atlas arc's critiques is that with balancing so many plot lines, certain individual character arcs can feel rushed or out of nowhere, and I do see that with Emerald. Or rather, I see that with Yang relating to Emerald. Like, was being a tsundere all it took for Yang to accept her? She's got confrontation after confrontation, then she makes this face, and then M shows her tsundere side, and Yang says, nah, this one's fine. This one, she's fine, come on, she's just like Weiss. Like, I kid, but yeah, there's not much lending to it. Part of me says they could have pushed Emerald talking to just after the point of trusting Ozpin, so they could have that lend more toward her too, and it still does, they still make a moment of it, but what I mean to say is that any of these critiques about Emerald, or I guess about, well, everybody else relating to Emerald, are all rather small for a power of friendship show like RWBY. Even if it mattered more to me, this is the kind of criticism you have to check at the gate when you sign up to watch a power of friendship show. That's how it is. Ren's semblance evolved through well-constructed in-universe means, but also by the power of friendship. There's definitely that element there. So, now that Emerald is back, now what? First, I did just say last review that I'd like to see a fight between Emerald and Neo, or a fight where at the very least their illusions are fighting semi-directly on opposing sides, and I think that is, well, now even more possible. Emerald doesn't want to yeet herself out of a narrative anymore, and I'm interested to see what her role in the final battle will look like. She did say she switched sides, so she'll likely be at least a little bit more actively helping the heroes rather than, well, passively in the background with a semblance or something. Even if she is somewhere in the back of the fight throwing her opponents off with her illusions, I still want to see that. But that being said, I don't know where Emerald would go after this volume. As much as I like her redemption, and I do see the comparison to Zuko's arc from Avatar, which is a reference that I do understand even though I have not fully seen Avatar. Anyway, I do see the resemblance, and I think it is fitting for her. As much as that is, there's also plenty complaints about RWBY's large ensemble cast, and as much as every character has really contributed to this volume, I get the idea. We gotta start bagging some bodies. We gotta whittle the numbers. The Anima arc came and went, and oh, Sun and Ilya aren't gonna stick around too, are they? Well, thankfully not, and I see a very similar situation happening with Emerald. There is a timeline where she could overstay her welcome, and I'd certainly love to see the heroes stay at odds or at least very cautious around her for now. But I'm going to enjoy Emerald while she's here, however long and in whatever form that is. My fourth takeaway, this is what made Ren's semblance evolve. This is a character succumbing to the idea that their actions are futile, so why bother acting at all? And this time, it is for Ruby Rose. Ren's semblance evolved when he got through this. He started out at a place where he had a singular focus on the mission, and only success would justify the means. And then, when his entire worldview of Huntsman changed, so did his semblance. And here's the thing with Ruby. She's not really at that point yet where her semblance will evolve, but it could easily get there because her situation isn't entirely like Ren's, but it's about as close as you can get. Ruby's mental game took a really hard hit, and even though she's better by the end of the chapter with Penny, her cause for being broken earlier on was the Hound and by extension, Summer Rose. So if Ruby gets better from this entirely, it's less that Ruby is making it to point B like Ren did, and is instead getting back to the same point A that she started out with, but with a renewed vigor. And I don't know if that is enough for a semblance to evolve, but I could see it going that way. It is a separate question of whether I think Ruby's semblance will go that way, will evolve. I mean, only earlier this volume did we really have a concrete explanation of what it even is. But you could argue that they did that as set up for a point where Ruby would do something that's entirely different. That they call out what it is so that it means something when she does something hypothetically she should not be able to do. Either way, Ruby Rose is definitely my next candidate for an evolved semblance. For my fifth and final takeaway, as always, I look forward to a hope or a prediction I have for the future of RWBY, which could be either next week or maybe even the next arc, and I predict how it might happen. Before that, though, I check in with the previous hopes and predictions I've had with this graphic. So I've already talked about the Emerald versus Neo idea from my previous chapter review. The Happy Huntresses and Crimson are a low priority for the plot right now, and I still think Volume 8 will end with some form of foreign aid coming to Atlas. Whether that's a bunch of foreign aid or literally just Raven, or nobody at all, who knows? So what am I looking forward to this time? My fifth takeaway for RWBY Volume 8 Chapter 11 is that I need to know more about Ironwood. I think we'll be getting a more in-depth look at Ironwood's character, specifically his motivations or some form of at least mention of his past, because I doubt that he's around for much longer. And one of the show's faults is giving characters development at what seems like the last point they could possibly get it before it's not remotely worthwhile anymore. For Cinder, in order for Salem to con her in Chapter 6 of this volume, we needed to know her backstory for it to work at all. And it comes literally that same chapter. So given that Ironwood has a metal half of his body and is so far gone, I think the narrative could really effectively use at least a short scene to choreograph exactly where his descent started when he perhaps was not yet a cyborg. And maybe now that Ozpin is back and could potentially act as a leader in some respects, which I really still freaking want, maybe Ozpin is what sparks that. I'm very death of the author when it comes to Ironwood's semblance. Like, I understand that, at the RTX 2020 online panel, they talked about it, being metal, being this sort of passive drive to just get through the one task at hand that you can see taking him over at various points throughout the Atlas arc. But to me, I'm a lot more willing as a person to put that specifically on Ironwood and not on his semblance. I'm a lot more willing to disregard his semblance when it comes to his actions and not think that it's some sort of parasite because it hasn't been in the show. I'm very willing to just completely separate what the writers say about their own show because they failed to put it in the show. And I think at this point, it would mean so much less for Ironwood to the point where, like, why bother including it at all? And so I don't really think they're going to include anything about his semblance at all because there's been so many better places for them to do it that at this point, why bother? But with or without a mention of his semblance, I think now is a great time for the show to include some form, long or short, of Ironwood's backstory. And those are my 5 takeaways from RWBY Volume 8, Chapter 11, Risk. Everything else is just an afterthought. I'm doing chapter reviews once a week on my channel, and I also reacted to Chapter 11 to get my bearings on that kind of thing with my new PC. So I'm not sure if reactions will continue, but the rest of the volume is probably very worth doing them. What are your thoughts on Volume 8, Chapter 10, and what do you predict for the future? Do you think Ironwood dies this volume? And do you think the battle for Atlas will end this volume? Let me know down below. And while you're around, like and subscribe. I'll see you next time. I'm Raijin Rising. Have a good one. To be honest, Cinder's semblance could evolve too with her massive development.